What are the country's top CEOs doing to build extraordinary teams and cultures who thrive even during a pandemic? You're about to take a deep dive into the minds of wildly successful C-suite leaders who are evolving the way that we work in the 21st century. Welcome to this special edition of How to Be Mesmerizing. Hey everybody, welcome to How to Be Mesmerizing. It's Tim Shurr, and we have another extraordinary CEO with us in this special series on mesmerizing CEO secrets. So I'm going to jump right in and tell you a little bit about Sonny in a second, but first, Sonny Vanderbeck, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, so excited that you're here. All right, so Sonny is the co-founder and managing partner of Satori Capital. And he's an investor, an entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and a former Army Ranger. So thanks for your service there, my friend. Before founding Satori, Sonny co-founded and served as CEO of Data Return, who under his leadership sustained 40% quarter-over-quarter growth for more than 3 years, which is very impressive, and reached a $3 billion market capitalization, which is equally impressive, making Sonny one of the youngest CEOs ever to lead a NASDAQ-listed company, which is very impressive. So his book, Selling Without Selling Out, How to Sell Your Business Without Selling Your Soul, is a classic. We're going to be talking about that. Sonny also served as a section leader of the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He also led technical teams at Microsoft, and both roles helped him to learn the value of principled leadership in extraordinarily challenging situations. So like all my guests, we could spend the whole show talking about Sonny's accolades. So I'm just going to jump right into the questions. As you said in the last time, our last conversation, let's go ahead and wade into the river and see what happens. So, so Sonny, what skills did you acquire as an Army Ranger that allowed you to excel in business in the way that you have?
I think there were quite a few, but the one that comes to mind first is this idea of around the next bend. So here's the deal. We see a lot in popular culture about visualization and thinking about long-term outcomes and goals and all that. And here's the truth of it. When it gets really hard, you can't look out that far. When it gets really hard, you've got, I can make it 5 more steps. I can make it to the next bend in the trail. You get really focused on, what do I have to get done next? This idea of sort of next action. When things are difficult or overwhelming, you can add to the problem by making it too big. And so one of the things I learned was not try to figure out if I can make it all the way to the end. It was just figure out if I can make it through this next thing that must be done.
That's very wise and accurate, because when you're in a lot of situations, it's difficult, very difficult sometimes to think about what we ultimately want to create for an organization when you're in the trenches trying to figure out how are we going to get through payroll sometimes, and how are we going to get to that, how are we going to make it through the rest of this week with this fires that we have going on that need to be put out. So I suppose your leadership, and that's when your mission statement, your values, those become your compass when you're in those situations. I would imagine a lot of people get really tested when they're trying to stay values oriented, but they're in these really difficult situations. How do you navigate through that?
I think part of how you navigate through that is to spend time before you're there working on your values and actually supporting them and reinforcing them. And if you've been tested in small ways on your values regularly, then when you get tested in a big way, it's not a new and shocking thing. It's you've tested it before. You understand what it means. You maybe have had to make a hard decision. Imagine a circumstance, which I've been in before. You have a very high-performing team member that lives in a way that's totally in conflict with your organization's values. What do you do? Well, the official answer is, of course, you do it based on your values. And hey, that's hard. It's really hard to take your best salesperson or your best executive and have the coaching conversation. Say, hey, look, you're getting results, but you're getting them in a way that's not okay. And you can't stay here if you do that. Those easy to talk about, difficult to do. But if you've been through those things along the way, and have spent time reflecting on what's important to you and putting it into action, it does make it a little easier.
It's sage advice, Sonny. It's really good advice because I've talked to many veterans, many people on the police force or firemen or firewomen, and I say, what do you do when you're in those crisis situations? And they say, we fall back on our training. And that's what you're saying. So yes. In business, your training is have those meetings before you need them, so Absolutely. You can fall back on that.
I'd say one tip around that is be careful about believing your own BS. Like the better you are and the smarter you are, the easier it is to convince yourself of that thing you want to do that's in conflict with your values, that, well, it's okay because, like, watch out for the rationalizations. When hamster starts running and you start rationalizing, it's a good opportunity to check yourself and just kind of step back and say, well, hang on a minute.
That's the importance of building your team around the values as well, so that people can keep each other in check, because we can start to rationalize, especially under pressure, just about anything. And so that's a very smart observation. Yeah. I've been in those rooms where we had to talk to the #1 sales rep, right? Or a high performing physician at a hospital that was a client of mine, or a high performing executive. And it was very difficult because they were very good at what they did, but, like they were great with getting new business, but they were terrible at how they treated their employees, right? Or their colleagues. And having those difficult conversations, and occasionally those people left because they just didn't fit the culture anymore. And what happened was everybody else's performance improved. And so the company ended up making more money and thriving in a bigger way, because everybody else is watching too. If you're talking about values and then those values are tested, every other person on that sales floor is watching what you're going to do in that situation. And if they see that you give them a pass every time, then they're not going to take it serious and they're not going to apply those values. And then when they see that you hold their #1 performer, accountable, then they take that serious as well. So people are always watching what their leaders are doing.
Yeah. Somebody somewhere said your values are the behaviors you tolerate. This is a good reminder that sits on my shoulder every now and then. It just reminds me to go, hey, if you're tolerating whatever this is, you're telling the world that that's one of your values.
Wow. I love that. The behaviors you tolerate. You've already got me taking notes, Sonny. I love it. All right. So let me ask you this then. So I've interviewed a lot of veterans over the years who applied their battle skills to their battle skills training to business with kind of a divide and conquer mentality, especially a lot of people in special forces, right? And so they thrive really well in that business environment, but they often rate a little lower on the empathy scale, right? So from you being a ranger, and then all of a sudden, you're tough, you're fearless, you're strong, you're able to handle high pressure situations. But how did you develop that mindset where, you're caring so much about your employees and your suppliers as much as your stakeholders? You've got that piece to it. How'd that happen?
Yeah, I think twofold. One, I had the experience of having some great leaders when I was in the military. Mm-hmm. And two, then when I had my own teams, you get to try stuff and see what works. I think in a lot of cases, the military is not what people think it is. Mm-hmm. And in particular, in special operations units, they often behave differently than the rest of the military anyway. So I had these experiences where I had leaders that cared about me because they didn't just care about today. They cared about me as a long-term part of the team. Mm-hmm. And so if you can nurture, coach, guide, develop, and actually deeply care about your team with a long-term lens, you're going to get better outcomes and have a better team. So I got to experience that, and then I tried it myself, and it worked, and I got great results. It's not being soft, but compassion is an important skill as a leader, and being able to see where somebody is and how to get them through the next piece. And I've got an interesting story actually on my own end, because the public face we see of all this stuff is, bluster and, whatever. Mm-hmm. So when I went in the military, I smoked 2 packs a day and I couldn't run a mile. Mm. I was 17 years old. Wow. Here's this kid in that kind of shape said, I'm going to go be an Army Ranger. I got into just basic training and AIT, and it was killing me. It was so hard. Like every day, you're up at 5 and you're running, and I'm sucking wind quite literally. Yeah. I'm like, man, I'm barely keeping up. Yeah. Just barely keeping up. How in the world am I going to make it as a Ranger? Like, this is ridiculous. So I went and talked to one of the sergeants, and I'm like, hey, I'm well worried about this. I think I should just give the slot up because I have no idea how I'm going to make it. Yeah. He looked at me and he was like, well, hadn't beat you yet, has it? Hmm. That was about all he had to say, right? He hadn't beat me yet. And of course, my answer was, well, no, it hasn't. And he's like, okay, well, then just keep going. Hmm. And I kept going and kept going. And, as you know, the story ends. And so that learning, like that moment was just the right thing I needed to hear. What if I heard instead, well, quit crying, go try harder, or you're not cut out for it, or all of the other things one might have said. That's not what I got. I got, well, it hasn't got you yet. And you just keep going until it does. Though you have lots of moments like that. Now, I will say, I can say that now with, I'm 20, 25 years away from all of that. My first year or two out were a tougher transition because I was used to being around people that had the same level of intensity and attention to detail. And I probably didn't yet have the skills to be calm, collected, and nuanced in the moment. So it took me a little while to learn, but you learn, you pay attention, you go, wow, I probably can't. I actually yelled at somebody in a meeting and told them to do push-ups. It really happened. The best part is they did them.
Wow.
So I had to grow my toolbox a little bit.
That's funny. That's what I do with my kids. If they were acting out, I'd say, give me 20 push-ups. I figured at least you're going to get in shape.
That's right. Might not mind, but you'll be strong.
That's right. That's really great wisdom. I know a lot of the movies will show, people out there, lone wolves and everything, but truly most of the veterans that I've talked to, they really do care about, especially the leaders. They really did care about their people. They wanted everybody to come home. It felt like that was their sons and daughters, and they really wanted to, it was a very close-knit, strong family, and you have to have that trust in order to, that trust and that camaraderie to go into, especially into battle situations. You got to know the person behind you has your back, right? And you have theirs. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense that you would develop that kind of mindset. And especially, that gave me even more chills when you said, what if that guy hadn't said that to you? What could have happened? Yeah. So it's very important to be mindful of how you respond to someone when they're in a vulnerable state, because you're going to have quite an impact on them. So I'm glad that person stepped up for you.
Me too.
So, yeah. Yeah. So for many years of being in the business trenches, you've mentioned being able to assess the capability of a leadership team in about 5 minutes. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Sure. So the idea is to take your org chart and print it out. And if you don't have one, that's probably an issue in and of itself. Like you can make one, write it down, figure out who's in charge of what.
Yeah, create an organizational chart. Yes.
Yeah, your manager level and above, like anybody that leads people, team leads, all that kind of stuff. Just print it out, put it on your desk, and get 3 colors of stickies: green stickies, yellow stickies, and red stickies. And go through it and just put a green sticky by everybody who you think is capable of their current job at twice the company's size.
Mm.
These are your high potentials. And the conversation with these people is, look, the future of the company is you. You're about to see a lot of work come your way. It's not because we don't like you. It's because we think you're one of the highest potential team members we have. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And here comes a bunch of really important stuff. Like, this is the crowd these are your future leaders. The second is the yellow. You get the yellow sticky out. And that's for everybody who's doing a great job at the company's current size. No complaints. They're doing just fine. And when you look through the lens of, okay, we're twice as big now. How are they going to do? Like, well, they have issues, or they have things they need to learn, or what have you. Well, now your opportunity is to have that conversation with those people. Hey, you're doing great. And our company's growing, and we need to grow your capability as a leader at least the same rate the company's growing. We certainly wouldn't want the company to outgrow you. So let's build a development plan. Let's figure out what skills and what capabilities and what perspectives you need to be capable as a leader at twice the company's current size. So now you're into a development plan conversation with them, and the reminder that you have to keep growing, right? You didn't, people think, oh, well, I made it. I'm finally an executive. Yeah, you made it for about 24 hours. And then reality sets in. The job's hard. Yeah. So that conversation about learning and developing and growing, right? If you think about if your core team is of that mindset every day, then as the company grows, many of them can grow with the company. And then finally, you have the reds, and they're in every company that's been growing. And it's not that they're bad people, it's just that the company outgrew them. These are the people that are very competent and very capable at half the company's current size. Mm-hmm. Every single time I've had this conversation with a CEO, by the way, they immediately know who their greens are, and they immediately know who their reds are. Like, I've never talked to a CEO that said, yeah, I don't really have any of those. We managed to bring everybody along. It's reality. You have people that have been extraordinarily loyal to the business, that helped it through different stages of life, and they're still here, and their job just outgrew them. It happens. It's not bad. It just happens. Yeah. Well, you've got a coaching conversation with that team member to say, look, the business has outgrown you some. Let's talk about how we can get you caught back up. And some people are all in for it. They're like, oh gosh, I had no idea. Tell me what to do, learn, etc. We'll lean into it very hard. A surprisingly large number of people meet that conversation with relief. First time it happened to me, it blew me away. I had no idea. Like, I had built this, big negative conversation up in my mind, and they were going to be so disappointed and all these other things. And that happens too. But it was the relief conversation. And we're like, oh, thank God. I feel like the last year or two I've been out over my skis. I didn't want to let anybody down. So I was trying as hard as I could, but I didn't really know how to do this job right. And that is more common than we expect, where people want to be a contributing member of the team. They want to do a good job, but inertia just let their role outgrow their current capabilities. And so they might go to a different role in the company and thrive and be happy.
That's excellent. That's really great advice. I love how you broke it down that way. And, in those conversations where I've been in the room with some people that were in the red, you're right. Find a different spot in the organization so you get the right person in the right seat. Or sometimes it's just not a fit anymore. Yeah. Or if it's, they can do the job, but it's a values conflict where they just don't want to be a part of the values anymore. They just don't think that way. And so they just don't fit. And I was always impressed by the leaders who said, well, that's okay. Let us help you find another job where you do fit. We'll write a great letter of endorsement for you. We'll talk to the hiring manager for you. We'll be a reference for you. And, or maybe I know somebody that has an opening somewhere else and we can help you to get another job. And it wasn't, you're fired, get out of here. It was a very much, we care about our people. These are our values. And so even if you're not a part of the team here, you'll always, we're always going to be there for you.
You can learn a lot about a company by how they treat the people that are exiting.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Well said. Well said.
One other nugget on that. Doing it yourself is important, and having members of your leadership team do the same exercise is also important. Often there will be high potential people further down in the organization that you just can't see as CEO. You may not interact with them enough. Or people that your experience of them is, oh, they're doing fine, but your entire leadership team is like, no, they fell behind like a year ago. What are you thinking? And so you'll find a little bit of new data in having other people do it. And I'm actually reminded of one of our portfolio companies. We had a new president come in to work in partnership with the CEO. In the first 18 months or so, he identified somebody that the beginning of the story is she was a billing manager. The end of this story is she's COO of the company now.
Whoa.
In 5 years.
Wow.
He identified this capability. She's like, what? She got a lot more capability than anybody realizes. And so the coaching and mentoring and guiding over the course of 5 years, she ended up as the number 3 person in the company.
Wow. That's a great story. I think you're right. Sometimes, especially on the size of your company as well, it's hard sometimes to be in touch with everybody or to really understand, their performance and how they're delivering or if they aren't. And so including others in that and people that work with them day to day and getting more than one opinion. There might be personality conflicts as well. So, getting more than one opinion from different people can be really great feedback also. So you should know who's on your team, and what their best skills and attributes are.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. One of the biggest challenges a lot of companies have is they've just got the wrong people in the seats. If they moved them around a little bit, they'd see a increase in engagement and performance. So that's really good. All right. So from our last conversation, I'm a big fan of asking mesmerizing questions. I think that the quality of your questions determine the quality of your life. And you can find the answer to anything if you ask the right question. So there was 3 questions that you had asked that really stood out to me. And so I want to cover them now because they'll help our listeners. Okay. So let's start with number 1. You had said when you're working possibly with a new company or a new client, or you're collaborating or you're funding somebody, you often ask the question of why does business exist? So can you elaborate on that question of why does business exist and some of the answers that you've received?
Yeah. And I'll start with this. I think business is often misunderstood, particularly in the media. Somewhere we got this crazy idea that business is just an ATM, that it exists just to sort of spew money out the other side and it doesn't do anything else in the world. We think business is actually the most powerful force for change in the world. And I'll give you an example. So the purpose at Satori exists to create, fund, and inspire businesses that elevate humanity. And so this idea that business does something in the world, like if a business doesn't create any value in the world, it just ceases to exist. It goes away. And we can get a little distracted because, we all talk about the same 20 companies that are these giant megalith public companies, but that's actually not most employers, nor is it most businesses in the world. And if we look at how the human condition has developed and improved over the last 200 years, if you look at a GDP chart for all of human history, there's 100,000 years of flat line. And a couple hundred years ago, something happened. And the experience, everything from life expectancy to leisure time to opportunity to learn, grow, and develop, all of those things have absolutely transformed and continue to transform. In the last 20 years, we've almost entirely eradicated poverty in the world. Like just mind-blowing improvements in what it means to be human. And so I think most businesses actually have a reason to exist that's not a generator of money. They started with some unmet need in the world. How is fulfilling an unmet need a bad thing or even a transactional thing? The world needed whatever it happened to be. And somebody or some team stood up and said, you know, I think I'm going to make that. I mean, that's how we got in this investment business. Randy Eisenman, the other co-founder, and I were both CEOs. And we business dated for probably 4 years, spent 2 or 3 hours a week together, had no idea what was going to come of it. We just really liked each other. Mm-hmm. And we started to complain. And we complained a lot about the capital markets and investors and how the whole thing worked and short-term thinking and you know, you get an entrepreneur complains long enough, a business comes out the other end of that. Because we had no choice. We're like, why are we complaining about this? Like, we can go fix this.
Yes.
And so even the genesis for Satori was our own belief that the world needed an investment firm that had a long-term mindset and cared about things like culture and had people on the team that have been in the chair and made payroll and those kinds of things. So look, I think business exists to create value for its stakeholders. A business that has employees that are fulfilled and motivated by the work they do, and customers that love the company, and suppliers that feel like partners, and so forth. That's creating a lot of good in the world. And our belief is, by the way, if you get those things right, the shareholder part works out. The economics of the business end of things, that all works out if you've got happy customers and employees and suppliers.
Yeah, that's really good. So I mean, that's a powerful question then, you know, why does your business exist? You know, what value are you offering? What is your mission? You know, do people understand the importance of their job, or that their role in their company, you know, is important? Do you help people see how they're making a difference and how their role fits with the whole, you know, organization? You know, when I first started working with companies, a lot of times I would find that, especially if it was 100% commission sales company, right? Then it was all the other departments seemed to rotate around sales, and sales was you know, they got all the perks and they got taken care of and everything else. And the other departments always felt like they didn't matter as much. And when I would work with CEOs or presidents who had that same vision as you and Satori about culture and caring about others and how that increases engagement and profitability more than anything else, then everybody was made to feel special. Everybody knew why or how their role contributed to the organization's success. And especially these days with the younger generations, they want to make a difference. They want to feel like they're contributing and they feel valued and appreciated. So it makes sense that, you know, you would ask that question.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to give a question that's the other side of that question. If your company ceased to exist tomorrow, who would care and why?
That's a good one.
And then you start to dig in a little bit and you realize, hey, maybe there is more. I had a friend who bought a manufacturing company some 10 or 15 years ago in a small town in Texas. Mm-hmm. And he struggled with this idea of purpose for quite some time, because the nature of the products they made, like, it wasn't changing the world. You know, I think it was injection molding or something like that. And it satisfied the customer needs, but it wasn't creating this sort of massive customer value. And he struggled with this for a long time. And at the end of it, he ultimately realized the purpose of his company was to provide opportunity for its employees. That was the most important thing it was doing in the world, was creating opportunity for these team members and opportunity in this small town. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't a profitable enterprise that was growing, et cetera, but then you start to look at, you go, of what consequence is revenue targets? Like, you and I can talk about growing revenue all day long, but what does that mean to Jim on the floor? Like, why does he care? It's the suits again, talking about revenue. Like, when your business is to create opportunity for your teammates, revenue growth matters a lot, because it means we can hire more people, we can create more opportunity, so on and so forth. Think about how transformative that is to be absolutely connected to that purpose in a company that before this work was just a company. We make a thing and people that work there just have a job. Total transformation in the way people related to the company. So your purpose is not always around your product. It can be. It can be around changing your industry. It can be around the impact you're having for your suppliers. Even a lot of these food companies that have a deep connection to fair trade, right? A big part of the ownership and leadership's mindset is when we can buy, $50 million a year of coffee beans from small villages somewhere, that is a tremendous impact on the village. I'm not going to tell you what your purpose should be, or should it be a customer one or supplier one or industry one. But my advice is that go figure out who cares and why.
Wow. I love that. So, I grew up in Northwest Indiana, and my dad worked at U.S. Steel. He was an electrician in the steel mill. And so all our neighbors were, they called us the region rats, and we all everybody worked at the mill, and we had a lot of veterans from Vietnam. And so I was just around that energy my whole childhood. And I remember they were complaining because my Uncle Donnie worked with the union as well. And they were sitting around talking, drinking beers like they always did. And I was sitting there listening, 9 years old, 10 years old. And I remember one of them saying, we work our ass off trying to meet these quotas and try to make these things happen and try to get, these things that, these goals that they set for us. And then we kill ourselves doing it. And then as soon as we hit it, they say, here's your reward, 10% more production next year.
Right.
And so they're like, I ain't doing that anymore. I'm not putting all those hours in and trying to do everything like that. And so then fast forward, I don't know, maybe 15 years later, and I'm sitting there in front of the executive team at US Steel.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm talking to them about, they brought me in, and I remember he said, I'm the money guy, for US Steel. And he was a tough as nails, just one of bald suit and, whatever you might imagine for a steelworker CFO. And so, and I was talking about helping people make a difference. And he was talking about how to help people get more motivated. And he said, I want you to talk to some of the leaders here and try to get them more motivated. And I said, what about the rest of the employees? And he actually referred to them as the untouchables. He says, they don't care. You couldn't help them anyway. He says, they don't care about, they're just there to try to get a paycheck, and I was like, I was real young. So I didn't know a lot about business or about culture or anything like that. I was a great motivational speaker. And so they brought me in because they thought I could motivate people. And I never forgot that. I'm like, wow, this guy does not care about them at all. They call them the untouchables. And I'm like, well, that's not true. I'm sure if you had a message, that was right. And he's like, I don't even want to hear it. And then, and I remember sitting there in front of a group of these foremans, sitting there, and it was a very surreal experience. And I was talking about how caring about one another and how you make steel that's built the world, your steel and what you do, you've created the ability for us to build our world. And they were looking at me like nobody had ever said that to them before, and I was just there complimenting them because I thought about all the years my dad worked at that place, and if you ever been into a steel mill, that's what hell would look like. It was very scary and dangerous.
Intense job.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I didn't go much farther than that because the leaders that didn't care, they didn't have that vision. They didn't care about culture. They were just trying to get more, from the people without really pouring into them. But in that moment, I made that group of people, one of the guys said, I think you're the smartest kid that's ever been in here.
Right.
And all I was doing was complimenting them and helping them to see their value and helping and trying to appreciate what they were doing for the community and for the world. And that might have been as far as it went, but that also seemed like it was the very first time anybody ever said that to them. So I don't know. There's my US Steel story. I've never told that to anybody before.
Really
so I'm telling you, Sonny. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that was great. I loved how you answered that. So question number 2 builds on it. You have said, how are you communicating with your stakeholders, your suppliers, your employees, and your customers, How are you communicating with everybody? Why do you ask that question? Why is that important?
I think as you ask a question about how you're communicating with them, right, you start to explore, how do I feel about them? Why do I care? Should I bother? Or the realization of, oh my gosh, we don't talk to our suppliers except through, reverse auction, online bidding. It's entirely a transactional relationship. So the asking is sort of how you're communicating ends up picking up things like, do I have empathy for each of these stakeholders? Do I understand where they're coming from? Do I understand what's important to them? We had a portfolio company that bought about 50 million a year worth of steel. So decent sized steel buyer. And the industry practice was, hey, it's steel. It's either to spec or it's not to spec. And I'm going to buy it from whoever is the lowest bidder by a half a cent, right? It was a pure commodity. So of course I'm going to buy it like a commodity, squeeze, 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 et cetera. Mm-hmm. Well, our leadership team, we think understood some nuance about the world they lived in, understood how important this steel is, kind of specialized steel. Mm-hmm. They couldn't make their product without it. So they went to probably their favorite supplier and had a conversation about strategy and about strategic objectives. And so imagine you're sitting with one of your suppliers that you buy an almost entirely commoditized item from. Mm-hmm. And you're having a real conversation, like, tell me what your strategy is. What are you trying to do in the world? How are you trying to grow? And to actually do that in a way where you care. Well, here's what came out of that conversation. The company said, look, and this was a steel service center. So, notoriously razor thin margins, very capital intensive, et cetera. They said, look, we are going to add actual service to what we're doing. So we want to increase the amount of processing we do on the steel before it heads out the door. Long story short, because I give you an hour version of this story, our company ended up saving 30 million in CapEx. Wow. By doing the unthinkable. They said, we're going to let our steel supplier do the first big bends on this piece of metal. It was something that could be done consistently. You just needed the machinery to do it. The supplier wanted to do it. We were indifferent. Like, the whole industry was like, no, you have to own that machine yourself. You have to do it yourself. It's important. And we're like, I don't think so. Yeah. So we saved 30 million in CapEx. And oh, by the way, when this steel went on allocation, who do you think was first in line? Us. Yeah. Because we allowed our supplier to make a little bit more margin on this piece of it. So we got all of the steel. Well, this was a business that ebbed and flowed. And when it was flowing, there was a lot of customer demand, which meant you could set the price at which you'd sell the product. Problem was there was no steel because everybody was in that same environment. So it was the scrabble to get more steel. And so you might make most of your profits in 2 years out of every 5. Mm-hmm. And that was entirely determined by how much steel you could get your hands on in that time period. Well, guess what? We were first in line for the steel. So this company grew from 60 million of revenue to 225 million of revenue organically in 4 years.
Holy cow. Wow.
They got a lot of things right. The team did a really great job. But one of the most important ones was they actually turned a commodity supplier relationship into a partnership by starting with, hey, tell me about your strategy. What are you trying to accomplish in the world? What are your hopes and dreams? And then figuring out, how could we participate in that?
That's a brilliant story. That's a brilliant story. I love that. That is so good. When we talk about commodities, we talk about things as though they're, just these, just these products, but there's people, there's human beings behind that, producing, putting it together, packaging it. There's people in those companies that are behind those commodities. And when you start taking a look at the people and treating them like people and caring about them, that builds that trust and that loyalty. And that's why you ended up first in line and why they took care of you, because you took care of them. And it can be a giant transaction like that, or something that's, results in multi-millions of dollars. but it can also be, I was talking to a manager, I don't know, maybe a year ago, and they were talking about the challenges with COVID and deliveries and things like that we're still dealing with. And he said, this company was late on shipping their stuff to us again. And so I called up the director that was there, and I could tell she was bracing up to get another yelling. And instead, I just poured into her and I said, I bet you're having a really challenging time right now, and you're getting a lot of phone calls. And I just want you to know that we know you're doing the best you can, and that we care about you and we're here for you. We are, kind of following up to see what's going on. But, he said, I was just really nice and I was really thoughtful. And I thought about how I wanted to help that person feel before I made the phone call. And it was amazing because she was so thankful and she was so appreciative. And it was like, when she first answered the phone, it was like within 5 minutes, I was talking to a completely different person. She was upbeat. She was cheery. She was like, I'm going to figure out what's going on. And we got an email about 20 minutes later, and she said, we're going to have your stuff there by tonight. I made some things.
Yeah. Funny how your stuff goes first in line all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Just by actually caring about somebody else.
Yeah.
I think that's, I won't call it the tough part, but the real part of all this, you actually have to care about other people. If you don't care about anybody else yourself, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. You can't fake it. You put on these slick people skills. People can feel it. You're saying all the right things, but they're like, I get a weird feeling. We can intuitively sense that someone's just, I call it putting on a show.
Oh, yeah.
Versus being really authentic. That takes more work. You're right. Yeah. Very good, Sonny. All right. The third question that you asked people that I thought was really good is, what does a real partnership look like? And you've kind of already answered this, but let's take a crack at it anyway. So when you say, what does a real partnership look like? When you're looking for people you want to partner with, or you want to provide funding for, your approach is very different than most. And so why do you ask that question, and what are some of the answers that you get?
Yeah, I think asking the question is a little bit connected to our earlier conversation about, caring about other people. You get some insight into, what do they care about? Mm-hmm. I will tell you, in our case, there are a couple of things that matter a lot. And this is both for partnerships where we invest and down, inside of our companies. The first is just to pull the horizon out, right? To have a longer term mindset. The nature of business is very much that some days everything's going your way, mm-hmm. and you're on top of the world and you have all the power in the ecosystem and you can do no wrong. And then our friend Murphy shows up. And Murphy shows up and says, well, that's not how it's going to be for a while. And so what I see in these relationships between investment firms and companies, between customers and companies, team members and companies, the world ebbs and flows. And I'm doing great today, but tomorrow that's going to be inverted. I had a friend who ran a company, pretty good size, probably $1 billion in revenue, travel business. And one of her biggest supplier groups were hotels, independent hotels in particular. Long story short, post 9/11, hotels in New York were not in a good state. It was pretty rough. And most of them faced the specter of going out of business. And the company was in a position to actually be able to help these hotels out. But basically provide them loans to just keep the doors open long enough to get through the settling process and to let New York reopen and so on and so forth. And one could look at that and go, well, that was charity. One could also look at it and say, no, with a long-term lens, balance of power changes. It always does. And I was there for them when they needed me. And now, post 9/11, New York comes roaring back. Nobody can get inventory. The hotels are all full. My friends are on this travel business. Well, guess who gets rooms first? They do, because they were there in the hard times. And again, so part of this is like, if I'm just thinking about this quarter or even this year, none of this stuff makes sense. But if I can draw my horizon out a little bit, all of a sudden this idea of doing what you can for other people when you can, that the world will change. It happens with, customers too. If you hold a customer to the letter of the contract, but that wasn't actually the spirit of the deal, that's fine for now. But those people all remember. People don't forget that stuff.
No.
Southwest did a good job of this for many, many years. They just wouldn't lay people off in the downturn. Their conclusion was they had a longer term lens. The goodwill they built from that relative to the economic consequence, when the world came back, and it always does, they had a bunch of team members that were loyal to the company and felt like the company was there when they needed it. And that absolutely works both ways. So funny thing, karma is real in business. That's all. Like, you can boil almost all this stuff down to just that. Karma's a real thing.
That's great. Karma's a real thing in business. I love that. That's a great soundbite. You're right. And you talk about leadership, the best leaders are looking at sometimes short, get through the next 5 steps. And other times they got to look through that longer lens, right? And you got to have the ability to do both, which is very good. I want to ask you your thoughts on this, Sonny. I just read an article in Inc. magazine. I'm going to read it here. It said in 1965, an average CEO salary was around $951,000. Today, it's around $24 million. In 1965, an average employee salary was around $43,000, and now it's around $61,000. That's quite a jump. So, that, and a lot of times leaders are, the Inc. magazine also said that half the employees have been told that it's China's fault, that disparity and why they haven't made more money and things like that. But employees since 1965, their salaries have gone up 20,000, and employers have gone up about 23 million. So what are your thoughts on that gap?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of thoughts on this, and most of them are inconsistent with the narrative. So I'll start there. Be ready.
I'm ready.
So a couple of things. One, I think looking at purchasing power matters a lot. The team at humanprogress.org has done a great job of deconstructing all of this into basically time purchases. How many hours do you have to work to buy a TV, a refrigerator, a car, like all of these kinds of things? The second, and the answer you might imagine if I'm bringing it up is a little bit different conclusion than one might draw. Mm-hmm. The second piece is it's really easy to sort of cherry pick these stats and to build an article. Like, somebody sat down and they weren't doing a research paper to say, hey, what's really going on here? What's underneath this? They were writing an article that people would read and click, right? We're all familiar with the idea of clickbait. And I'm not saying this article was clickbait, but I can say my skepticism level is often very high when there's an article designed to inflame. Say, okay, well, what else is going on here? Look, I spend my day around CEOs, and this sort of idea of this sort of demonized, archetypal, greedy CEO, like, I don't know where these people are, but I'm not meeting them. The CEOs I'm meeting care deeply about their people. They're trying to do a good job, et cetera. One of the things that's happened, though, and there's a book called The Second Machine Age. It's probably 8 years or so old now. And it's really about AI. Mm-hmm. And sort of here's what's happening in AI. But the second chapter digs into this wage gap conversation. Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing I'll point out there is this idea of a wage gap assumes there's a fixed pie. And if you assume that economics and money and prosperity is fixed, then you'll always lead yourself to an answer of something unfair just happened. Mm-hmm. Because this person got more than this other person, and now we got to determine, like, okay, well, what should the ratio be? Mm-hmm. Prosperity is not a fixed thing. Prosperity is not a zero-sum game. Yeah. All of humanity has improved its condition dramatically for the last 200 years. Mm-hmm. And so the minute we start with the comparisons, we have an assumptive zero-sum game that if person A got something, they took it from person B. Mm-hmm. It is just not true. It makes for great articles. It makes for great sound bites. It's not true.
Yeah.
I do want to point out one interesting insight that the Second Machine Age team had, and it was this: that there are a lot of jobs that have accelerated as a result of technology. They're more productive as a result of technology, and there are a lot of jobs that haven't at all. That the job is no more productive today than it was 20 or 30 years ago, because technology has by and large had no effect. And when they went and sort of picked apart the jobs, what they found was this idea that the jobs that have been accelerated by technology, the wages of those jobs have risen dramatically over time. And the jobs who haven't been accelerated by technology have been relatively static over time. Now, still on a purchasing power basis, certainly better off. And I'm going to make one more comment about this sort of conversation about team member pay versus executive pay. Well, two. One, like when we just look at the world's 500 largest companies to make conclusions about this, those things are a different animal. And I'm not even sure that's capitalism that happens at that scale, but that's its own podcast about sort of how the mega corporation works. And now I've absolutely lost my train of thought thinking about that podcast and what we might cover there. I remember where I was going to go with this. So one of the things I see commonly in these kinds of articles is CEO pay as a multiple of the average wage in the company. And here's the missing piece in that, because it sounds real good. It's like, oh, what a great comparison. It sounds real good. So what you're telling me, though, is that the CEO of a consulting company whose employees make $200,000 a year on average should make more money than the CEO of a grocery store whose employees might make $10 an hour. Why? Like what connection does the nature of the work that's done? So if I have more expensive employees, that's consulting company CEOs should make more money than grocery company CEOs. I can't get my head around that one at all. So I think, look, it's one of those neat sound bites that when you dig into it and pick it apart, it doesn't seem to hold true. And final comment, a lot of this is shaken out right now anyway. We don't appear to have a surplus of labor. There are more jobs open than job seekers at the moment. But virtually all the CEOs I talk to, the thing on their mind is we can't find enough great people to come to the company. And so this is one where I think that the market will by and large sort of sort itself out. If there are disparities, then we're about to get those fixed as the market is going to take care of it.
Great response. Great response. You're right. It is easy to cherry pick ideas and throw them together for an article that, grabs attention and causes a lot of controversy, because that's what they do. That's why they write those articles. And so it's fair. You really need to make some clear comparisons. And I love what you said too about some of those larger conglomerates where that's not even capitalism anymore. It's its whole other thing. So yeah, that's very good. All right. I got one more quick question. Well, two more questions for you, Sonny. So you were the former co-chair of YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And so, you've done a lot with them and creating the entrepreneur part of that, helping to co-create the, what's it called? The Entrepreneurship and Innovation Network. So you've been working with so many CEOs over the years and a lot of younger CEOs as well. So do you think that more younger CEOs are really embracing the idea of the triple bottom line with, people, planet, and profits, and ideals of conscious capitalism? Or do you think it's going to end up being the same kind of spread that it always is?
Yeah. So a couple of things. A framing comment here. When we started Satori, I figured, 10 or 15% of the world would have these same kind of ideals and values about business, this idea around conscious capitalism. Mm-hmm. And one of the best surprises I've ever received is I was so wrong. Mm. It's 80+% of these businesses. I meet these CEOs and these owners, and they actually do care about their stakeholders. They might not use the right words. They don't have a PowerPoint about it. They don't have an ESG committee, like all of the fluff and the trappings. They don't have that stuff. Mm-hmm. But these stories inside these companies about how they related to their stakeholders, about what it's like to be the largest employer in a small town, about faith-based businesses, as an example. Like, these stories are everywhere. So we call them the unconscious conscious capitalists. CEOs are like this more often than not. Most of the CEOs I know actually care about their stakeholders. Mm-hmm. They often have one that they've picked that's the most important to them, the employees or the customers or what have you. But it's generally not the shareholder or stakeholder that's first and foremost in their mind all of the time. So I wanted to sort of level set the world as I see it, at least in the United States. Most of these CEOs are out there quietly trying to have a great business, whose employees like to work there, whose customers appreciate the company, and so on and so forth. Do they call it triple bottom line? No, they don't call it triple bottom line. They just, like, how else would you do business? That's often the question I get was, well, you mean there was another choice? That some people are horrible to their teammates, or, treat their customers poorly, or they're almost flabbergasted by this idea that you would do these things.
Yeah, how would you stay in business? Mm-hmm.
So our starting place is actually better than we think it is. But again, the narrative, what we mostly talk about are these really big companies that maybe don't do as well as some of the other companies. And so to your question about sort of the next generation coming up, I think the difference is that they just talk about it more. It's less internally held values. And of course, that's how I would do it. And more of a need to sort of show these values, whatever they happen to be. But yeah, I think this is, it's become okay to talk about. I think this is one of the things we're trying to do when we started Satori. If you remember our purpose, create, fund, and inspire businesses that elevate humanity. Part of what we were trying to do is make it okay to talk about this stuff. Right? For a long time, so a little bit like the special operations view, the CEO view was, you got to be tough and a little gruff, and it's all bottom line. And the truth of it is, there are a bunch of people doing something different, not talking about it. Collectively, we made it okay to talk about caring for other humans. And the funny thing is, you actually get better results if you do it. Like, that's the paradox of all this. By not chasing the profit, you'll end up with more of it.
Yes, you don't chase, you attract. That's awesome. Great answer. I love it, Sonny. So you wrote a great book called Selling Without Selling Out. Where can people find that book and learn more about you and Satori Capital?
Yeah, so to learn more about Satori Capital, it's satoricapital.com. Learn more about me, sonnyvanderbeck.com. Those two should be easy. And the book is on Amazon in Audible, Kindle, and hard copy.
Outstanding. And it'll be in our show notes. We'll have all the links as well. Sonny, this was absolutely mesmerizing. I really love all the deep insights that you have and all the great wisdom that you've shared. So thanks so much for being an amazing part of our show today.
Thanks for the conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Hey, it's Tim. You ever wonder why so many talented, hardworking entrepreneurs and business owners struggle with inconsistent self-belief, or high stress, or procrastination, or self-sabotage? Well, the answer may surprise you, and the solution is already inside of you. I've been searching for the answers to this for decades, and I found them, and I put it into a new program called The Power of Your Unconscious Mind, Mental Secrets for Accelerating Success. And because you're a listener, I want to give you a free VIP copy. Head over to PowerMindsetProgram.com. That's PowerMindsetProgram.com and grab your copy today.